Good evening, C3 parents. I am happy to be back. I'm your coach, Karien Pitout, and welcome to the new studio. Not completely done with setup. There's a couple of tweaks and things that needs to happen, but we're getting there. Okay, so tonight we are actually going to cover an extremely important topic. So just give me a moment so it make it easier for you to hear me. Say hello to the new one. Hello, hello. Anyway, all right. So we're actually going to talk about an extremely important topic, death in the family. And how do I speak to my kids about death in the family? How do I engage with this difficult topic? Most parents, we kind of dread. There's a couple of topics, like we kind of dread having to talk to our kids about. And this one is usually quite high up. In the past 3 years, well, we're in year three now, um, the world has been gripped by a constant influx of death reports. We're on social media and we constantly see this person passed away or that person passed away. And it's hitting closer and closer and closer to home for most of us. We have almost a year ago lost my brother, not due to COVID, but he did pass away. And we ourselves had to have this conversation with our kids. So, from the knowledge that I have and from the research that I've done, this is how we as a family spoke to our kids about the passing of their uncle and how um, that is the best possible way to do it and approach it, because death is never an easy subject. It's always it's filled with so much raw emotion, so much hurt and loss and unspoken things, that we sometimes struggle, and we're so scared to traumatize our kids that we want to shield them sometimes from the realities of life. Now, death is a certainty in life, and we have one life and we have to live it. And it's one of the things that I actually continuously have said to my own kids, that you've got to live your life to the fullest, because death is a certainty. Um, and I've said it often to my kids. So when we start, let's say a family member's got a long-term illness and they've reached the point where we need to say goodbye. The best part of how to handle this is actually from the get-go. When this family member was diagnosed or is diagnosed, have an honest conversation with your kid. Allow them to ask questions. Don't try to shield them from the reality. Kids understand what's going on. So often I say to parents, kids mirror how we feel and how we behave and what we do. And what happens is, if we're going through the struggle and we try to buffer our kids away from it, our kids pick it up. They pick up on non-verbal cues so much, because it's part of the survival brain is to follow the non-verbal cues to survive in the village, in the group. So the more we try to hide these things from our kids, the more we try to separate, like almost like keep them at a distance from that, actually the more harm we cause. So bring them into the fold, have an honest conversation with them, explain to them this is the illness, this is what they're facing, this is the possible outcome, but we're not going to focus on the outcome now. We are working and we are going to celebrate this person while they're still alive. So that when the day comes that they've got to say goodbye, it's not sprung on the kids. And I've had a parent that asked me, but what if I just don't tell them about the illness, don't take them to say goodbye, and just inform them that this person passed away? And I'm like, that's an even bigger shock. Think about how you as an adult will feel when you hear the shocking news of someone that you love dearly, family member, or someone that you cared for dearly just passes away suddenly. It's a shock on the system, so much more for our kids, because they might seem resilient, but they don't have the sophisticated brains that we as adults have to process it. But there's something about the way where their brain development is at, that they take things at face value. They process it almost, um, easier, but they process it differently because they're still learning how life is working. For them, it's like, oh, okay, it's an inevitability, it happened. Um, it can even sometimes feel that the kid is pretty blasé when they initially get the news. Some kids may react the way that we expect them to cry, to go through the stages of denial and negotiation and trying to find ways to negotiate the death away. But the reality is, kids find a way for them. They've got, I almost want to say, they've got easier questions to answer. So, how do I talk to my kids about this? First of all, we're honest. We're deeply, deeply honest. And I'm not saying brutally honest, like guts and gore and all the grim detail, but honest into when they ask how that person passed away, that you would say this or that or the next thing. My brother passed away in his sleep. Um, so we explained to our kids that his body decided it was time. It's done now. And he went to sleep and his body just didn't wake up again. That was a good enough explanation for our kids. And that's basically the explanation that we have as adults. That is the important part of this conversation, is understanding that when we have these conversations, we don't have to go in every tiny detail, but we have to be honest. After you break the news, that is when you give them space to ask questions or even to react in a way where they're like almost blasé. They're stunned, they're thinking, they're processing. Give them time to do that. Give them time to process and to think this thing through in how everything fits together in their heads. They will come back and ask more questions. The second thing about losing a family member is we usually, especially if it's a close relative and you're involved in the funeral arrangements, we're in such a rush to get all the funeral arrangements done that we kind of sideline the kids. And then they dragged to this situation where they sit in the funeral or in a memorial and they're faced with this event that's happening, but they've got no idea of what to expect. So take them through it while you're busy planning. Explain, take them through it, make them part of the planning, make them part of the process. Interesting. Someone once said that arranging or organizing a funeral and a memorial, and it played such a big part in my head. Like arranging it and organizing it, it gives those who are the closest to the person that passed away a chance to say goodbye step by step. Every decision you make, from the flowers to the program to every single detail, that step by step process actually helps with our healing and our processing, so that by the time that we reach the day of the memorial or the funeral, that even though a lot of us like, okay, you don't really get time to maybe cry your heart out, um, but it's letting go. It's easier to let go. It's easier to see that process flow through instead of um, just the person passed away and bam, here it is, and I now need to say goodbye, and I have no control over it. You have some semblance of control back, and that is incredibly important for this. So give that to the kids as well. If they were really intimately close with the person, ask them maybe what kind of flowers they would like to have at the funeral, um, or the memorial. Make them part of the discussions, especially when they're a bit older, when they're around about 6, 7, or 8. When they're much younger, there's a more gentler touch. You can explain to them, okay, we're going to have this memorial, we're busy arranging it, where we're going to celebrate this person's life, and this is how it's going to work. This is the program, this is the process, what they're going through. Another important thing is give your children a choice. Often, I've had to counsel families where they've lost a loved one, a family member, a close relative, And the first instinct of that family members will be to say, okay, you know what, we'll organize a babysitter, leave the kids at home. They don't need to suffer through this. And I think it's because a lot of us have vivid memories of almost traumatic memories of funerals, and I think it's because we were excluded in the process, but also because there's this expectation that you're surrounded with this sadness and this expectation of kids to behave well in a situation that is significantly uncomfortable. um, and they don't have a choice. They may not have wanted to be there because they may not feel comfortable in a space like a memorial service. And it's not disrespectful to the person that passed away. They're not here anymore in any way. A memorial service is for those who stayed behind to celebrate and to think and to process the death. And they don't have to be there. They can do it differently. And it's not disrespectful to any other person that is mourning their loss that they are suffering to for if the kids decide to not join, to not be there. It's not disrespectful. We need to give them that choice. Both my kids decided not to attend the memorial service for my brother, and we were for well, thanks to COVID, the COVID regulations, we actually have a recording of the funeral. And our youngest was only ready really to go through the memorial process. I think it was 7 months down the line, and we sat and him and I we watched the funeral again, and of the memorial service we watched it again, and it was an incredible experience because I also for the first time really truly listened to what was said in the service. And the nice thing about being able to have rewatched it was we could pause it for our little one, and when he had questions about okay, what happens next, what's this thing, and it just made things a little bit easier for him, and also for me to just be able to revisit the saying goodbye. um So giving them a choice really helps them have some control. Also, that semblance of control that we need after something like this gave them a semblance of control in how they work through their emotions and how they reason things through. And then the aftermath. When all has settled down and the phone calls stop coming and the food stops being delivered and like the world just carries on, that's when the true grieving really starts. We've made ourselves loose. We've had the conversation, the honest conversation with our kids, but this now becomes the process, the going through the grieving time. Now, I will link a video that I've done about how kids grieve, how to handle kids grief. Um, I will link it down below. I've done that way early on the channel, and I'll just link that for you. But it's important to understand that every single person grieves differently. Yes, there's 5 stages of grief, but they don't run in a specific order. It jumps around a bit. And our kids can mourn and grieve in different ways. But one of the things that we pick up when our kids grieve sometimes is that they act out. They're so uncomfortable and so hurting. They just want to get that hurt out. They want to bleed. There's this expression that hurt people hurts people, and people bleed over people that didn't hurt them. When they're hurting, they will act out. They will become defiant. They will push boundaries. They will get cheeky. They may have a lot of anger at the loss. It is okay for them to have that. It is normal. Be compassionate and be open. And I understand you yourself are grieving, so it's very difficult to have space and grace for someone else in that particular time. Rather than see it as an opportunity for you in your grieving process to clean out the wound and put some ointment on and go through it. Whenever the kids act out, It is such a good opportunity to sit down, light a candle, and just start sharing stories about the person that passed away and how you feel about the person that passed away. Another thing to remember is not every person is a good person, but often in death, people focus on the good. Kids will focus on the good, but the bad as well. There's a saying that say don't speak ill of the dead, and I don't know where it comes from, but it's completely nonsense. Because if someone was really a bad person, or really made so many bad choices in their life that caused so much harm, they're not a good person all of a sudden just because they passed away. And our kids, your kids will like really remind you that this person, like the good, the bad, the ugly, everything about this person when you actually go through the talking things through and working through the loss. Don't judge them. Don't stop them, even if they're talking about the bad things that that person did. Because the reality is, they remember the whole person as they got to know them. And when we mourn, we need to mourn the whole person that we've lost, even if some of the memories hurt deeper than others. So have that space and have those conversations. Talking about the person that passed away is not a taboo. It is actually so important. The other day I saw a thing posted, and it really struck a chord. A lot of times people don't want to talk about someone that passed away out of fear of hurting the person that suffered the loss. And in the meantime, the people who suffered the loss is craving just for someone to mention that person's name so that they can share, so they can talk about that person, so that they can grieve and find equilibrium. And it's so difficult the further away you get from the date of death to find that equilibrium or get an opportunity to talk about the person that passed away. Um, so ask about that person, discuss that person, and talk about that person in front of your kids and with your kids, and remember them. Don't get stuck. Don't get stuck in your grief. Don't get stuck in the moment, and don't get stuck in the loss. It is important for us to move forward. Your life is forever altered, and the child's life is forever altered. There's nothing we can do about it except walking forward and living life. We only have one life to live. And as I think tonight, especially on families that have lost parents, children, brothers, sisters, really close relatives, grandparents. Okay, if I keep on mentioning cousins, um, as I think about people who have lost people, especially now during the pandemic, and in such a wave of deaths, I want us to spare a thought of kindness towards people, because we don't know how raw and how aching their losses, how far they're in their grieving process. Society is set up that expects of children and people to bounce back from losses like this. And it's not necessarily always easy or possible to just bounce back. Nobody really bounces back from a loss, and people grieve differently. So be honest with your kids. Be straightforward with them about the loss. If they ask questions, answer them honestly. If they ask a question that you fear the answer will be too graphic or way too much information that you're comfortable with sharing, do ask a follow-up question of why are you asking that? Why are you curious about that? What is it that you would like to know? Because there is usually reasoning behind that. Don't get angry at our kids for the way that they act when they're grieving. Have space and grace for them. Obviously, it doesn't mean anything goes and that you don't parent at all, but have space and compassion for their behavior being impacted because of overwhelming emotions that they're not mature enough or old enough to really deal with, and have grace for yourself during this time period. Guys, I think that is where I'm going to end tonight's conversation. Very serious conversation. Please stay safe. And my thoughts and prayers goes out to people with family in the hospitals, people with sick loved ones, families who've lost people, and people just standing up and trying to move on. And to the kids out there that is trying to work through and find their feet in the chaos that the world is in at the moment, good luck. Stay honest and stay authentically true to yourself. You will get through this. Much love. Cheers.